The day I learned patience. I remember the day the whole village waited for a goat. Yes, a goat. It sounds ridiculous, but it changed everything for me. It all started when an elder named Kofi announced at sunrise that we would have a feast that evening. Kofi was the wisest man in our village, and when he spoke, everyone listened. He said, "Patience is the greatest virtue, and today we will test ours, but you will be rewarded." Then he pointed to the edge of the village where Kwame's goat was tied to a tree. "When the goat comes back to its owner without being forced, the feast will begin," Kofi said. At first we laughed. How hard could it be to wait for a goat? But the hours dragged on, and the goat didn't move. It just stood there, chewing grass, completely ignoring us. People started whispering and complaining. "Why don't we just go and bring it back ourselves?" someone asked. Kofi only smiled and repeated, "Patience." By midday, some villagers had given up and gone home. But I stayed. I was young and stubborn, and more than anything, I wanted to prove to my father that I wasn't as impulsive as he thought. My father was one of the first to leave, shaking his head at what he called a waste of time. As the sun blazed above us, I sat with my best friend Ama. She was better at waiting than I was. Every time I sighed or complained, she would just say, "The goat will come when it's ready." By late afternoon, I was starving, and my legs were stiff from sitting. I wanted to give up. But just as I was about to walk away, something happened. The goat stopped chewing and lifted its head. It looked around, almost like it had been waiting for something too. Then, slowly, it started walking toward Kwame's house. We all gasped. The goat wasn't being pulled or chased. It just walked on its own, calm and sure, as if it knew the exact right moment to go. The crowd followed in stunned silence, and when it finally reached Kwame, everyone cheered. That night, as we feasted, Kofi stood up and said, "You see, patience is not just waiting, it's trusting, it's knowing that things will happen in their own time, no matter how much we want to force them." It's been years since that day, but I think about it all the time. Every time I'm tempted to rush something, a job, a relationship, even just a meal, I remember the goat and the lesson it taught me. Good things take time, and sometimes the best thing you can do is wait. But that's not all that happened that day. After the feast, I went to Kofi to ask him something that had been on my mind. "Elder, how did you know the goat would walk back on its own?" Kofi chuckled, his eyes twinkling in the firelight. "I didn't know, not for sure, but I've lived long enough to know that sometimes when you stop trying to control everything, life surprises you. Animals, like people, have their own rhythms. You just have to let them be." His words stayed with me, but it wasn't until much later in life that I truly understood them. Years after that day, I found myself in a difficult situation. I had started a small business selling handmade baskets, and for months I worked tirelessly with no customers. I was on the verge of giving up when I remembered Kofi's words, "Life surprises you." So I decided to wait a little longer. A week later, a merchant from the city came to the village. He saw my baskets and placed a huge order. That one sale changed everything. My business grew, and I learned that patience isn't just about waiting. It's about believing that the efforts you put in will eventually bear fruit. Looking back, I think the goat was more than just a test. It was a symbol of all the things we chase in life: success, love, happiness. Sometimes the harder you chase, the more they elude you. But when you learn to be patient and trust the process, they come to you on their own.